Okay, so we have applied both a guessing methodology and a more exact approach to trying to understand both what the reactions are for this indeterminate frame and the lateral sway. In our guess, we had an upper bound guess that this frame would sway about 1800 kip-foot divided by kip-foot cubed, that is, over EI, in response to this load. Turned out that our model said it was just a little bit more than half of that. We also, in the process, had guessed that the MCB, the moment down here at this fixed end, would be minus 60 kip-foot. It turns out to instead be about minus 48.75 kip-feet. Now remember what the guess was saying here, and that was we were going to ignore the effect of the beam, the stiffening effect of the beam, as though this was just a flagpole. And we do have to be a little bit careful about how we approach this in terms of the lessons that we learn, right? So that we don't get erroneous conclusions. But one of them that is going to be sound is that by ignoring the effect of the beam, we were treating the system as statically determinate. And when we did that, ignoring the effect of the beam, we came up with larger displacements, larger moments. And that's absolutely going to be true, that statically indeterminate systems are stiffer in general, and they tend to also end up with smaller internal effects. That would be the case here, that the final moment diagram is going to be smaller than it would have been had this not had this roller out here. That goes along also with not having as much displacement. That's generally going to be true. Now, as you start to progress forward, you're not going to want to make this statement every single time. This is the first time you've looked at this. This is one of the observations that we have. But as we go along, we also want to be thinking about how could we have improved our guess. And so what we might have wanted to do was to, in the future, have combined simple determinate effects together. And what am I referring to here? It's not past, but what we want to do in the future is combine simple determinate effects to improve our guess. So what we might do, for instance, in this problem, is really execute in a simple way what we think is going to happen here, right? We effectively did that in our guess, right? And so we could come along and then say, well, I know that's not quite going to be quite right, and I think we might want to do something like this. This is really what we were doing in the actual execution. The key is going to be, if that's 10 kips, how much load do I impose there? And what we just found out in this very simplistic case was that this thing was 60 kip-foot of overturning effect. We could have come along and said, let R be equal to that opposite of that 10 times 6. Well, that's not going to be right, is it? Because that's 60 and there's a moment arm here of 12. So I could have done this and I would have ended up with 5 kips, and then from that I could have come along and said, okay, then the statically equivalent column would have a moment up here of this 5 times R, or 60. Oh wow, see how that's working? 12 feet there. Oops. It's 12 feet, not kips. And so that's not going to be quite right, because that's going to be 60 kip-foot over a moment diagram that's like this, and this one's going to be all like that. So I might want to then chop that down so that I get something that's maybe the same area, right? That's 1/2 of 6 times 6 feet. This was 60. That's 60, or 60 times 6. That's 360. That's 180. And so that's area. So maybe I want to chop this down so that I have than a moment here that has the same amount of area. It's still not going to be right. Over 12 foot, m times 12 equal to 180, and 180 divided by 12 would be 15. So let that be 15, and now I can go and say I've got now curvature that's now starting to be kind of similar to this. Notice what I'm doing here, right? I'm saying that it's not the magnitude here. I'm just walking my way into this not being 5 kips, but rather let R be equal to 5/4. That 1/4 was the ratio of 15 to 60. That 15 came from the same area, the M over EI diagram, as what we had here. That gets me ever closer to now having kind of the same scale of things. This still was not the value of our final reaction, but it's a lot closer than the 5 kips was, and it gets us ever closer to having a guess that might be with tighter than what these are. This wasn't terrible, but this was pretty bad. I mean, that's a 2-to-1 ratio, but this is going to get us real close. We can sum up the effects of displacements and things between the two and use beam tables to get close to an answer.